Domain expansion, the pinnacle of Jujutsu sorcery. In this video, we will find out who has the strongest domain. However, this will be far different than what you're expecting and will actually be split into 3 sections. The first will be a top 5 of the strongest domain expansions, which will include just our basic ranking of domain counters, refinement, and the strength of the short hit. And then we will have the 2 sections where we split into who has the most powerful short hit. And there'll be a version for power and a version for hacks. Because obviously short hits differentiate so much, I'll try split them and give different perspectives to why I believe one short hit is stronger than the other, then give my overall POV on who has the strongest domain expansion. So let's start with number 5. At number 5, I have the Restless Gambler Hikari Kinji. And Hikari Kinji is one of the strongest domain expansion users in the series. His use of domain expansion, which can be quicker than even Mahito's 0.2 seconds, makes it that his short hit is pretty much instantaneous. And based on some text, of course, we are still awaiting proper translations. Him making his short hit harmless allows for him to have insane activation speed, meaning that he pretty much won't ever get caught up in the domain tug of war, because how many people are reacting in less than 0.1 seconds. Because of this makes his domain one of the hardest to counters from what we've seen. Of course, we'll have to see it in its totality when it's against another domain expansion. However, the likelihood is that they can get his domain off pretty quickly. He can also get the ability to loop domains, and he also gets a complete utter bonus of unlimited curse energy and becoming immortal. His short hit effectiveness is one of the strongest. His ability to loop domains is extremely strong. And not only that, but he has one of the strongest push and pull counters, preventing himself from potentially losing in tug of wars, allowing him to pretty much hit jackpot every single time. The person who I'd say is an honorable mention and works in a similar non-lethal hit is obviously Higuruma, whose ability can take away their curse energy or curse technique with his ability of conscription, and with that working with his mechanism of a lawyer and being able to put the person on trial. It adds something that a lot of sorcerers will not necessarily be able to guard against. However, because his doesn't necessarily have anything in regard to how quick the activation is, I do believe there might be other counters which we currently can't say Hikari can, as Kashimo even registered that it was too quick for him to even respond with a simple domain counter. And at number 4, that is Mahito's self-embodiment of imperfection. His domain expansion is one of the strongest we've seen, and not only throughout the series did we see him continuously improve on it, he has performed some of the craziest domain expansion feats. With him changing the 2-step process of activating the technique and creating your barrier, he was able to do a 0.2 domain expansion like Gojo and gave us one of the craziest moments. Not only that, his short hit is arguably the strongest in the series. With idle transfiguration, the minute you are touched, it is then game over. More than just that, it makes it very difficult for counters with the fact that he can do his domain expansion very quickly. And as we saw in the Yuji Mahito and Todo fight, idle transfiguration on Todo was quick enough before his simple domain could register, and if it wasn't for Todo's quick thinking of taking away his arm, he would have become another idle transfiguration victim. So to me, Mahito has everything in regards to refinement, the strength of his short hit. Of course, we saw how it activated when it went against a domain counter, and Mahito's genius in combination with his curse technique gives us one of the strongest domain expansions we will ever see. At number 3, we have the man Kenjaku, and the person second behind Tengen in barrier usage. His barrier knowledge is obviously supreme and has led him to have an open domain expansion, being able to open his barrier. More than just that, he's able to potentially, of course, we are still learning the mechanisms of his domain expansion, but potentially use the other curse techniques of his host, as we saw him use the reversal of gravity against Yuki. Not only that, but we saw how it did against domain counters. Yuki used her simple domain, and just to the strength of his barrier and his short hit, he was able to strip it away pretty much instantaneously to overwhelm her with the short hit. And if it wasn't for some quick thinking from Tengen, they probably would have lost Yuki a lot earlier. At the end of the day, this domain expansion is pretty simple because we still are yet to find the full mechanisms and to see what is the actual short hit itself. Just from portrayal as well as him having an open domain, I think it comfortably sits up at 3rd, leaving the 1 and 2, which should be pretty obvious. At number 2, we've got the man himself, Gojo Satoru, the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer. His ability of Unlimited Void is second for me personally. He has amazing refinement, has a short hit equal to Sukuna's, and even has the barrier knowledge to be able to change his conditions on the fly. Has everything, and if it wasn't for the simple fact that his domain can't open like Sukuna's, it would arguably be the strongest domain expansion. However, he is just a tad below because of that fact, and with him losing the majority of the domain clashes against Sukuna. But to be honest, he has the arguably strongest short hit between him and Mahito. Whoever you think has the strongest short hit is pretty much undecided, and being being able to flood a limited amount of information to a user is too broken. Now we have our number 1 Sukuna, the king of curses. As we've seen stated in this clash against Gojo, he has demonstrated to us that he has the strongest domain expansion. He may have a weaker sure hit against somebody such as Gojo. However, his barrier knowledge, his refinement, his ability to think on the fly, they all contribute to him having a stupidly broken domain expansion. I know that Gojo has managed to tank it, so people have begun to lower the effectiveness, but the ability of Cleave that can adjust to the user's toughness and Dismantle that can target inanimate objects, it leads to a very destructive domain expansion that can even be increased with a binding valve for its range, which means that it targets multiple people. Not only that, with his domain expansion being open, he has a large range of effect, meaning there's a lot more people that can be included, giving him way more utility against a group of sorcerers. I believe with all those factors, he just leads him to have the strongest domain expansion. And now we go to the second section. Who has the strongest sure hit? First, I'll go through the hacks version and then I'll go through the power section. I'm not going to be including Higurume and Hikari because I guess they could be included in hacks, but because they're on non-lethal domains, I guess not leave them in. So someone who's like, oh, you should put a Higurume, or you should put Hikari, that is probably why they won't be included. But now let's talk about our number 5, and this is actually the smallpox deity. I know a lot of people will be surprised by this, but the ability to basically give them the disease after 3 seconds is pretty crazy. Not only that, it took a simple domain to stop him. And not only that, it took 2 people in comparison to actually fight against him, with them swapping places. I believe the utility, and for the most part, of course, with a simple domain, you will be able to stop it. But the effectiveness of the short hit with giving you 3 seconds to survive before you then get infected by the disease is pretty strong. And even though people are going to say that it didn't do enough because it was against Mei Mei, we take into account that the user isn't as strong as another person. And if we gave this domain expansion to a stronger user, it would have a lot more effectiveness and actually be one of the strongest. However, I believe the hacks that it does provide is one of the strongest and is the reason why it's top 5 in the list. At number 4, we have the top tier Zenin clan member, Naoya Zenin. Obviously our favorite Zenin, but I think Naoya's sure hit is one of the craziest, being able to use projection sorcery onto the user's cell. The minute they move, they are affected, which pretty much makes them redundant in actually doing anything. They can't move, they'll pretty much stop in a standstill. However, I do think it would be pretty interesting to see how it interacts against other domain users, because does that mean that they can't then use their own domain expansion because they'll be affected by the projection sorcery? Who has no idea? With obviously Naoya dying, we'll never get that answer. However, I do believe the hacks that is used in this short hit is one of the strongest, and it's really up there for the strongest domain expansions we've seen. On number 3, that is Yuruzu, and Yuruzu's obviously True Spear is one of the strongest short hits in the verse. To basically erase you on contact with the infinite pressure is way too strong, and it's just unfortunate that Sukuna managed to bypass it with obviously being able to use Mahuraga by adapting to liquid construction. Because of this, I think that the domain gets severely underrated, and I think a lot of people just don't like Yuruzu, so they don't really give her the respect, but her short hit is easily in the top 3, and arguably could be higher depending on who you talk to. At number 2, I have our favorite 6 Eyes user, and that is Gojo Satoru. And I know a lot of people might say that they think he should be first, however, I'll explain myself briefly to why I got the person ahead of him. The reason I think Gojo's 0.2 domain expansion is a good proof that his domain isn't stronger than Mahito's short hit is that even with the 0.2, we know that the curse users in Shibuya could awaken. We also know that with 0.2 that the humans were affected weren't severely affected, and these are humans without curse energy, so they were out for like 2 to 3 months if I remember correctly, which to me limits the usage of the domain hit. Now someone will say, well, how do you protect yourself from his domain expansion? Currently, we have nothing to say that they can. However, there is one counter which we've seen with the 10 shadows, and that was demonstrated with Sukuna, and obviously Sukuna is an outlier. However, the fact that there is at least one counter to the technique, especially as for the short duration that someone can be in there and still survive, I do incline to believe that Mahito will have a stronger short hit and Gojo would be happily at second. However, if you want to say Unlimited Void is stronger than Self-Embodiment of Perfection, I can't really argue with you, apart from the fact that on contact Mahito domain expansion, you are done, compared to if you get hit by Gojo's, you are done. However, there is potential things that you could do beforehand to survive. Now we go to number 1, and that is Mahito. Of course, Self-Embodiment of Perfection. We saw with Todo, the minute he was hit with 0.2 seconds, he had to cut off his own arm to prevent himself from being an idle transfiguration victim. Not only that, but he's legit in the palm of your hand. And once he activates his technique, there is nothing you could do. Of course, there is, like with Gojo, another counter being, funny enough, Sukuna, whose soul is too strong that he can't be Ideal Transfiguration. However, because of the series so far, a lot of people aren't aware of the soul hacks. I do incline to make that as more of an exception, in a similar manner that the 10 Shadows is an exception for Gojo's, meaning that these two are just the strongest hacks short hits that we will see. I don't think we will really get anything else to change that. Now we go to the next section, and let's go to the power section. And I actually don't have a number 5, so I'm going to put Yuki's just from bias, because I believe her domain, if we had got to see it, would either be on the hacks section or be on the power section. But because we have no idea what it does, I'm putting her here because I have a Yuki bias. And then at number 4, we will go with Dagon. And I think Dagon's unlimited Shikigami constantly swarming you becomes very difficult to deal with, especially if he doesn't have to split his forces. But not just that, he can split his forces, meaning he has a lot more utility. He can target multiple people in his domain expansion, as shown in the Shibuya incident. But more than just that, I just don't believe it's as strong as the others, because even with that short duration that Nanami and both Nabito took off his short hit, yes, he did split the effectiveness to 80% to 20%. It still showcases the fact that they could survive for that duration, which to me means it's not as effective as the other short hits, which are pretty much one-shot kills for the most part. But Dagon's utility does make up for it and becomes one of the most aesthetically pleasing domains. So to me, I believe it's happily at number 4. And then number 3, we have our other disaster curse, and that is Jogo. With Jogo, for the majority of normal sorcerers, they get burnt up from just being in the area. Of course, you have exceptions like people like Gojo and etc. who just won't be so affected by his short hit. However, the short hit being something for flames personally just makes it stronger than Dagon's, which is an unlimited swarm of Shikigami. And I do believe for the most part, once they do get affected by the short hit, they're pretty much going to die. It's just very unfortunate that he came against somebody such as Gojo who could just completely stomp with the domain. And then he had his next fight against obviously Sukuna, where he couldn't bring out his domain because the same thing would have happened. But I don't believe you should downplay Jogo's domain effectiveness, and the ability to basically make a mountaintop full of lava is pretty crazy. And then at number 2, we have our Kenjaku. Like I said, there is still a lot of question marks into towards how his domain works. However, if we use the simple concept of anti-gravity, which was enough to put Yuki on death's brink to the point that she needed to use RCT. However, it does not take number 1 for the simple fact that Yuki at least survived one of those short hits. In comparison, the person who I have number 1, Yuki is not surviving that short hit, so there is no real give and take to suggest that it's any stronger. Of course, we're talking predominantly on the short hit itself, so like I said, could it target multiple people if they were affected? Maybe, because we don't know really their range of effect. However, because we still have limited information into what Kenjaku's domain expansion really does it use the other curse techniques of other users? Does that mean he can use curse spirit manipulation? Or is it just tied to him using one domain expansion? We have no idea, so for that sake, I'm going to keep it pretty short. However, just from what we've seen, I think it's easy to put it at number 2. And at number 1, this should be pretty obvious, and this is Sukuna, and he has the strongest powerful domain expansion. If we talk from just a power dynamic, the ability to use cleave, obviously to the person's toughness, and then dismantle, which cuts everything in his path. He leads to one of the biggest destructions that we've seen in the series, shown in Shibuya, and his domain expansion effectiveness is just way too good. I know a lot of people like to downplay it a little bit, not for the majority, but there is a small minute of people who downplay it because Gojo survived. However, using the exceptions for the rule does not take away the effectiveness, and that's why I haven't downplayed both Mahito, Gojo, and Sukuna, even though Sukuna is currently the only one who's actually had casualties with his domain expansion. But for the simple fact is, we know how these domains interact, and this is my personal list for each domain section. So I'll quickly do a recap of my top 5 domains, and in order it would be Sukuna at number 1, Gojo at number 2, Kenjaku at number 3, Mahito at number 4, and Hikari at number 5. And as I've just gone through the short hits, I will not be repeating that, but let me know where you agree or disagree with my list, and let me know your thoughts down below, and make sure to like, comment, share, subscribe.